Movie Holics!
What up, guys? Kyler Wilson here, and I've got a very special episode from Movie Holics for you today. You guys remember on one of those updates when I told you that we'd be launching 2 additional shows for our channel? Well, today is the day that we launch one of them. Now, I'm not trying to steal the show, so I'm just going to go ahead and let Mr. Jack Hudgens tell you what it's about. Enjoy.
Hey, I'm Jack Hudgens, and this is the first episode of The Niche. The Niche is a show dedicated to less covered movies and topics that will often, not always, but often, cater to science fiction, Japanese fantasy and sci-fi, and tokusatsu. One of the many reasons I decided to start this show was because of some of the requests that I got. I recently did a tokusatsu panel with Matt Frank at Shatterdome Atlanta, and some friends of mine weren't able to attend. Shatterdome Atlanta is a Pacific Rim convention run by some really cool guys. Make sure you check out their Twitter and website in the description below. I want to thank Matt Frank for helping me sort of spruce the energy of that panel because it would have been really boring otherwise. Keep watching. Anyway, those who were unable to attend felt I should do a video version, but I really didn't have the means, infrastructure, or even desire to do so at the time. Things have definitely changed, and I owe that in part to some close friends who wanted to see the presentation at Shatterdome. So it just makes way too much sense to start the show off with a crash course in tokusatsu. Due to support from some close friends, and the fact that the show will mostly revolve around it, tokusatsu just feels like the right topic to start off with. Now, sometimes I'll cover topics from mainstream sci-fi, and even some movies that are, gasp, not sci-fi, but today it's all about the tokusatsu tradition. So I've said this word enough now to get some head tilts, probably. What is tokusatsu? Literally, tokusatsu means special filming or special technique. It's a Japanese word you could use to describe special effects from James Cameron's Avatar to the Japanese Godzilla. But often it's used to refer to Japanese film and television that use miniatures, monster suits, and other practical hands-on techniques. Now, one thing tokusatsu is not is a genre. It's a style of film, kind of like anime or film noir. Film noir is often characterized by femme fatales, mortally gray protagonists, and heavy shadows. Likewise, tokusatsu is often defined by miniature effects and monsters and its own set of reoccurring themes that I'll jump into later. The movie that really popularized this style of filmmaking is the original 1954 Godzilla. This would lay down the foundation for tokusatsu, and it would be built on and remolded as these movies got more and more popular in Japan. The original Godzilla's special effects were done by this guy, Eiji Tsuburaya. He initially wanted to shoot the film with stop-motion animation, but had neither the time nor the budget. The Japanese film industry was, and still is, working on a much tighter schedule than Hollywood. In 1954, when the Japanese film industry was still rebuilding, it had even fewer resources. So instead of using stop-motion and trying to beat Hollywood at their own game, Tsuburaya instead used miniatures and a monster suit to bring Godzilla to life. See, this is a very Japanese style of world creating that Wall Street Journal Martin Flacker emphasized was what Japan drew from its traditions of craftsmanship and working in miniatures seen in pot-sized bonsai trees to compete with bigger budget American films. It also has deep ties with kabuki theater. Kabuki theater, or Japanese song and dance shows, date back to the 1600s. Tomoe Haraguchi, who directed one of my favorite Ultraman series, Ultra 7X, said, whenever a tiger or a snake or some other kind of creature appears on stage, they're portrayed very similarly to the way Godzilla was, by actors wearing suits. I definitely think the idea of putting an actor into a monster costume came from that kabuki tradition. To put this in perspective, about 2 years ago, I saw the Lion King stage show, and the lions were portrayed by actors wearing stereotypical African paint and lion heads on top of their foreheads. It looked nothing like a lion. But that's the point. Like kabuki theater, The Lion King was merely a presentation of the stage's reality, not a representation of what lions actually look like. And that's the difference between tokusatsu and modern Hollywood special effects today. Modern Hollywood special effects cater to representational art. Representational art demands that special effects must recreate our reality and trick audiences into believing that it's real. It represents what something might look like in our world. Presentational art creates its own reality, where its visual world is vastly different from our own. It presents its own reality. And that's the world that Eiji Tsuburaya created with Tokusatsu. It's a world that allows for stories that typically wouldn't work with representational art, and it's made all the crazy adventures with Godzilla and Ultraman possible. But do those adventures have any depth to them besides the art of bringing dueling monsters to life? Meet Ishiro Honda. Honda directed the original Godzilla, 7 of its sequels, and a plethora of tokusatsu film and television into the 1970s. Honda was a local company man. He never felt embarrassed about his work, because he was good at it, and he typically injected his most passionate themes into them. Honda was a pacifist, so a lot of his movies present ideas about universal unity, character unity, faith in ordinary people, and faith in science, especially over the military and politicians. In the original Godzilla, when Godzilla's existence is presented to the Diet Building, the Japanese capital, 2 groups immediately start arguing about whether or not his existence should be made public. This is a short criticism of how political parties tend to argue when more pressing issues need to be considered. Later in the film, the Diet Building gets crushed by Godzilla. In fact, that exact wing where the argument took place gets crushed. It's as if to say, all this quibbling doesn't really matter. He's a creature that's above the government, and he's just going to stomp on you whether you argue or not. Unlike so many American films where the military defeats the monster, Godzilla's actually defeated by 2 lovers and a scientist. The military nor politicians have anything to do with his demise. A friend of mine thought that the weakest parts of his films was how much time he spent on building up these huge plans against a giant monster, only for them to fail in seconds. These scenes are interesting to me because I see a lot of resentment in them. See, Honda was drafted in the 1930s to fight the Chinese, and he was pushed into active duty 3 times while trying to jumpstart his career. The 3rd time, he was a Chinese POW. He fought on the front lines. He knows how destructive these military weapons are, so the fact that he spends so much time building them up only to have a giant monster mop the floor with him shows a massive lack of faith in the military. But I don't want to give the impression that Honda's biggest goal was to undermine authority. His chief theme was unity. He loved the idea of friends and foes coming together to oppose a great threat, the entire world uniting to achieve a great victory. In 1957's The Mysterians, people from the remnants of the planet Mysteria come to Earth with hopes of repopulating their species with our women. Peace talks went south when they told us they wanted to mate with our women. Not only did they want to mate with our women, but they chose specific women that they wanted to have a hoedown with. The world comes together, uniting against this great threat, and creating new weapons to fight the Mysterians. Another movie widely known as Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, favorite of mine, took this story even further. Godzilla, Rodan, and King Ghidorah are sent by aliens to destroy the world. Countries support each other during this time of crisis, but what's more interesting is the disconnect and unity amongst the characters. Godzilla vs. Monster Zero stars Nick Adams and Akira Takarada as astronauts Glenn and Fuji, respectively. What's interesting about their relationship is that they're best friends from 2 different countries that were once at war with each other. In the film, Fuji's sister is dating a young inventor named Tetsuo, and Fuji and Tetsuo don't get along. Earlier in the movie, Tetsuo builds this portable lady alarm which emits this horrible sound. The sound ends up being the weakness of the alien antagonists. He ends up teaming up with Fuji and Glenn, and they unite to save the world. His invention practically saves the day, and Fuji ends up being okay with him dating his sister. Character camaraderie and alien invasion stories would be a staple in Tokusatsu. Aliens sending monsters to destroy the world would be the basis for Spectre-Man, Toei's Spider-Man, Godzilla, Super Sentai, Gamera, more Godzilla, and, eventually, Pacific Rim. Meanwhile, characters uniting to fight a great threat would evolve into a teamwork motif. We see this in Ultraman with the Science Patrol constantly banding together to fight giant monsters until Ultraman arrives. We also see a family motif, where the Zone family and Zone Fighter band together to fight the Garoga alien army. Teamwork is especially important in Super Sentai, which features a set of characters who are normally in quite a pickle if not all 5 show up to form their giant mecha. For those who don't know, in America, Super Sentai is known as Power Rangers. Another reoccurring theme that's adopted from Ishiro Honda's movies is that of sacrifice. Now, I don't want to give away the ending to some of my favorite movies, just in case you have a minuscule interest in watching these for the first time. But let's just say that the original Godzilla, Monster Zero, and Terror of Mechagodzilla include some excellent examples of sacrifice in these films. Even Pacific Rim caught on to this theme and followed suit, so go watch. Sacrifice is highly honored in Tokusatsu. In Ultraman, for example, Ultra Warriors will bond with a person who have made or are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. Bonding brings that character back to life and instills them with the Ultra powers. In Ultraman Max, Kato Tuma steals a state-of-the-art aircraft and tries to fight off 2 monsters with it. He gets blown out of the sky pretty quickly. But before he meets his fate, Ultraman Max notices his sacrifice and instills him with his own powers. Being a selfless saint is kind of the MO for fighting giant monsters. Now, the most obvious reoccurring element in Tokusatsu is, of course, radioactivity. The original Godzilla story was fueled by atomophobia, which included Geiger counters clicking, irradiated victims, and public concern about real-life events. The movie was used as sort of a way to alleviate a culture's fear of radioactivity, but the significance of radioactivity varies from film to film. For example, in Monster Zero, it was merely used to confirm Godzilla's location, and in the Gamera movies, it's barely mentioned at all. Some critics felt Tokusatsu took things too far. An episode of Ultra 7, for example, was banned for showcasing an alien that came from a planet devastated by nuclear warfare. That alien was covered in keloid scars, which was deemed offensive to bomb victims. The next often seen plot device is something we don't see in every Tokusatsu production, but it's popular enough to bring up. I initially brought this variable up to close the gap between Pacific Rim and Tokusatsu at Shatterdome, and nothing does that better than giant robots. Toho's original giant robot was first seen in the Mysterians. Mogera was used to dig the Mysterians' underground base, but eventually got lost and was destroyed. It inspired many other villainous robots such as Mechanicong and, of course, Mechagodzilla. In 1994, it was revived in Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla as a Godzilla fighting weapon for the military. In the 1960s and 70s, giant super robots were all the rage. Jumborg Ace, Johnny Sacco and his flying robot, Mazinger Z in anime, they were all huge. But characters actually piloting these things didn't really catch on until Toei's Spider-Man. In Toei's version, Spider-Man would fight monsters that could grow massive in size, and when that happened, he summoned Leopardon. We're coming on the third cinematic version of Spider-Man. You know what would really set it apart, Marvel? This!
Leopardon! Change Leopardon!
The Avengers is basically just a giant episode of Power Rangers anyway. Go all in. The next time the Chitauri come riding in on their giant monsters, you'll have Leopardon there to slice them up. Boom, Spider-Man becomes the ultimate hero of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Leopardon was so popular that Toei decided to put mecha into their own property, Super Sentai. In America, these giant mecha are known as Megazords. Although Daijuzin, as it's called in Japan, was the first Megazord in America, there were actually plenty of iterations before it. By the 80s and 90s, the idea of characters piloting robots was commonplace in Super Sentai and anime like Robotech and Mobile Suit Gundam. So what's become of Tokusatsu today? Is it a relic long forgotten, or is it still implemented? Although it's not nearly as popular as it was in the 1960s, or even the 1990s, it's still used today. Ultraman, Kamen Rider, and Super Sentai still air on Japanese TV today, and Super Sentai is adapted into Power Rangers every year. Smaller films, shorts, spoofs, and indie tokusatsu are produced constantly to keep it alive. Recently, the live-action Attack on Titan movie was #1 at the Japanese box office. While there were a lot of CG enhancements, it primarily used puppets, men in suits, and miniatures to bring the Titans to life. It was made in the tokusatsu tradition. Shinji Higuchi, who directed Attack on Titan, will co-direct and do the special effects for next year's Japanese Godzilla revival. It's hinted that the new Godzilla movie will use CG, suits, and miniatures to bring Godzilla to life. It's comforting to me that Godzilla will return to this style of filmmaking and show everyone just how Tokusatsu is done. At least that's my hope. So no, Tokusatsu is not dead. It's a traditional craftsman's form of special effects. Very hands-on and extremely unique, especially in a world saturated with CG. This is a filmmaking style that helped bring a country's cinema industry back from the abyss, and it thrived. I think a lot of the reasons that filmmakers love making films can be found in this traditional style, and I challenge audiences to not look at it as a cheap way to fail at making something look realistic, but rather a traditional form of presentational art. After all, if we can accept Tarantino's presentational art in Kill Bill, or Beatty's in Dick Tracy, or Rodriguez's in Sin City, or Snyder's in 300, I think we can accept Godzilla. Well, thanks for playing along with me. I want to thank Kyler and Monica for setting me up here. And I want to thank my close friends and Matt Frank for any words I may have stolen from him at Shatterdome. Matt, if you're watching this, you're always welcome. It's cozy, but there's still room. If you dug this and want to hear more, make sure you hit that subscribe button down there. It's the red one. It's easy, just YouTube made it so you can just have to click it once. Also, make sure to follow Movie Holics on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and SoundCloud. It's going to be just right down there, I believe. And also give their website a click. It's going to be right over here in the corner. Right there it is. And if you want to follow me personally, my Twitter is gman on sci-fi. You can find that in the description below. Also in the description is my personal website, Sci-Fi Tokusatsu. Give that a click as well. Until next time, guys, see you in the niche.
So guys, what'd you think? I know that Jack already kind of gave you his rundown for the ending, but I want to know, do you guys like this kind of content? Do you want to see more? Please make sure to let us know in the comments section below, and we will have more episodes of The Niche for you soon.